Zionism proposes to the world that they're just giving Jews a safe homeland after centuries of persecution, the same thing the Nazis used to say ironically. But the truth is, Zionism is way more evil than most people even realize, and the story starts way before modern Israel was officially born in 1948. Because the foundation of the Israeli state itself was laid through terrorism, ethnic cleansing, and manipulation of global politics, all wrapped up in the shiny branding of a people returning to their land. Take the Nakba for example, which literally means catastrophe in Arabic. It wasn't just some chaotic accident of war, it was a deliberate campaign where over 700,000 Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their homes. Their villages bombed and burned, their families scattered, and the entire history of a people was rewritten to erase them. Imagine for a second if that happened in your own city. Armed militias come in, force your family out, destroy your house, and then a few decades later they tell the world that your people never existed in the first place. That's what happened to the Palestinians, and it wasn't a side effect of war. It was the plan from the very start, because Zionism wasn't just a movement of safety, it was a movement of conquest. The early Zionist groups didn't hide it either. They ran armed groups like Irgun and the Stern Gang, who carried out bombings and massacres against both Palestinians and even British officials. And by the way, they also later admitted that they were terrorists. One infamous example is the bombing of the King David Hotel in 1946, where dozens were killed, and massacres like Deir Yassin. The Deir Yassin massacre took place on April 9, 1948, when Zionist paramilitaries attacked the village of Deir Yassin near Jerusalem, then part of Mandatory Palestine, killing at least 107 Palestinian Arab villagers, including women and children. The attack was conducted primarily by the Irgun and Lahi, who were supported by the Haganah and Palmach, the notable Zionist terrorist groups. The massacre was carried out despite the village having agreed to a non-aggression pact. It occurred during the 1947-1948 civil war and was a central component of the Nakba and the 1948 Palestinian expulsion and flight. And yet somehow history books in the West will frame these guys as freedom fighters while labeling any Palestinian resistance as terrorism. That's one of the biggest manipulations of Zionism. It flipped the narrative so that the occupier gets to play the eternal victim while the occupied are painted as the aggressors. But it doesn't just stop at just occupying Palestine. Zionism has always carried within it the ambition of a greater Israel, an expansionist dream stretching far beyond the borders of 1948, taking land from neighboring countries like Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt, and using global political influence to keep growing its power. And when you really zoom out, you see how this expansion isn't just about land, it's about control, because Israel positioned itself as the West forward base in the Middle East, exploiting its relationship with America and Europe to secure endless military aid, preferential trade, and diplomatic cover, while at the same time studying conflict in the region to weaken its neighbors. Think about it. How does a tiny country with barely 10 million people end up receiving tens of billions every single year from United States in aid, not loan, or get away with breaking international law on live TV, bombing civilians, and still calling it self-defense? It's because Zionism doesn't just occupy Palestine, it exploits entire nations through lobbying, propaganda, and guilt politics, constantly weaponizing the Holocaust and the idea of Jewish victimhood to silence criticism and justify expansion. And that's why people don't realize how deep this thing goes. It's not just about Palestinians losing their land, it's about a movement that was built on terror and deception, that continues to destabilize an entire region, and that plays the global victim card while committing daily atrocities. Zionism presents itself as this noble cause of survival, but in practice, it's built on the suffering of others, and it keeps growing by keeping the Middle East divided, by making sure Palestinians remain stateless, powerless, and voiceless. Every time you hear about new illegal settlements in the West Bank, every time Gaza is bombed, every time Palestinians are arrested or killed without trial, that's Zionism at work. It's not an accident, it's not just a conflict, it's the very ideology itself. And the most chilling part is that it has been all normalized to the point where people think that this is just the status quo, like this is how the world has to be. But no, it doesn't have to be this way. It's just Zionism have been so effective at controlling the narrative that most people don't even question it. But if you strip away the propaganda, if you look honestly at the Nakba, at the terror gangs that became Israel's founding fathers and IDF, and at the ongoing occupation and the dream of greater Israel, you see it for what it really is. Not a movement of survival, but a movement of domination, one that hide its crimes under the mask of victimhood, while exploiting nations and crushing an entire people in the process.